Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know, from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars, topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
Welcome in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, right here on the GSMC Podcast Network. This is your host back again to talk about all things basketball with you, Brice Lewis. Big news coming out of the NBA. We have a lot of stuff to get onto today. We got to talk about the potential breakup in H-Town. Houston looks like they're about to start over and restart and blow everything up as their two star players may want out. We'll also talk about more rumors on CP3. We'll talk about other stars that are trying to be traded. We have new targets that the Lakers want to go after. And we just have all types of news. Teams obviously gearing up for the draft here in about 5 to 6 days. So, they're going to try to make moves before the draft. Obviously, a lot of draft picks are trying to be traded. People are trying to trade their picks in the top 10. So you might see some movement over the next 4 or 5 days for that. You might even see some trades on draft day. So we have a lot of news to get into today on the GSMC Basketball Podcast. I just want to tell you guys, thanks for listening. Thanks for letting me be part of your day. And let's go ahead and jump right into it. So, the report out of Houston is that Russell Westbrook and James Harden are very concerned about the direction of the team. With them starting over at head coach and GM. Houston's at that point with the team where they're a good team, they're a relevant team, but they're not maybe necessarily a championship team. And then with all the restarting and all the changes, they don't know how the team is actually going to end up. So, with that being said, James Harden reportedly is locked in. He's still going to play for Houston. He's not aggressively pursuing a trade yet. He's committed to playing this season with the Houston Rockets. But as for Russell Westbrook, that is a different story. Russell Westbrook has demanded a trade from the Houston Rockets as he is looking to regain what he used to be in Oklahoma City, which is more of a floor general. He does not want to play off ball as much, and so he is looking to move off of Houston. So we're going to talk about Russell Westbrook and his potential options that are available to him. We have heard Charlotte. Charlotte's a team that's popped up as a team that has interest in Russell Westbrook. Charlotte has not really been relevant for a very long time, and adding Russell Westbrook would give them probably their biggest star they've had there in the last 10 to 20 years. Then you also have the Knicks. The Knicks, we've been rumoring throughout the offseason, has been interested in potentially trading for Russell Westbrook as well. And they would do it because they are looking to become relevant. They're looking, if fans come back, to sell tickets. Russell Westbrook is a box office player. He's a guy that you would want to go see in games, box office live, because watching Russell Westbrook is a great thing. And so, that would be a place for him to go. And then once you get past those two teams, it's really hard to know where Russell Westbrook would fit. The biggest issue with Russell Westbrook is he can't shoot. So in today's NBA, where shooting is super important, he can't shoot that well. He's also a guy who, when he comes to your team, he kind of changes a lot of things on the offensive end and defensively. He has to play a certain way for him to be effective, which will then change the rest of the way other players play. So he's very hard to bring into situations and then have him adapt to the current team's, the current team's format, the current team's construction. And so that's a big issue. So that's why when you look at championship teams, you don't really see any championship teams that Russell Westbrook could go to because he would change so much. And then you just don't know of any teams really willing to give up a lot for Russell Westbrook. That's another big question, is that the compensation. you're more likely, if you traded James Harden, to get a bigger package than you would for Russell Westbrook. And so if you're Houston, if you make this move, would this move even force you to trade James Harden? So it's like, okay, if we make this trade and can't get a lot back in return, now we are technically, logically, maybe a worser team. And then we have James Harden, who wants to win a championship, who wants to compete for championships, and is getting. And one of the things he's looking at with Houston is, are we still going to be able to compete for championships? That's why he's concerned with the direction of the team. Even though he's not requested any trades, that is a concern of his. And so, if you're Houston, that's also a decision and maybe something you have to kick. That's something you may have to look at and say, hey, we might have to make that move. We might have to trade James Harden and just start the thing over. I mean, this would be the best time to do it, because you don't want to bring James into a situation where the team isn't as good and then you're telling him to still give you 38 a night, knowing it's not going to get him anywhere. Remember, Houston has always really been competitive since they've gotten a guy like Chris Paul or Russell Westbrook. And so now losing him back to one star, James may not want to be in that situation. So that's a question that is going to be asked. What do you do with James Harden as well? And then we haven't even gotten to the issues with other players on the team. Eric Gordon has issues with his role on the team. He doesn't have a defined role. He feels like his role can diminish and be more important at times. If you know Eric Gordon can still ball, Eric Gordon is a really good player. He's a guy who can help any team. So you don't know how Eric Gordon made one out. PJ Tucker isn't happy about his contract. He feels like for what he's done for this team, he's underpaid. He's seeing other 3-and-D guys get paid bigger amounts of money than him, and he's thinking to himself, I should be getting paid like them, but I'm getting paid what I'm paid. So he's unhappy. Then Austin Rivers is unhappy because of lack of playing time. Because have you ever watched a lot of Houston Rockets games last year? And the thing is, they have a backup point guard in Austin Rivers. But really, when Russell came off the floor, it was James who became the point. And then sometimes they use Austin Rivers in short stints, but it felt like Austin Rivers, he's been a pretty big contributor sometimes for them. He's made some big plays for them. And it just felt like that, from what you were seeing and what you were hearing, they didn't value Austin Rivers as much as he thinks he should be valued. And so now he's unhappy about the lack of playing time. So now you have all these players who are disgruntled. You have a new head coach, a new GM. If you're Houston, you might need to blow it up. It really might need to happen because, if you don't blow it up, then what are you going to do? Because if you don't pay PJ, because PJ Tucker's a contract dispute. If you don't pay him, he may not want to play. Austin Rivers wants to play more, which that is probably a very fixable cause if they commit to say, hey, Austin, especially if they traded Russell Westbrook, you would then probably think Austin Rivers would be the starting point guard potentially, or he would be the sixth man. And then with PJ Tucker, like I said, that's a contract dispute. They have to work that negotiation out. Who am I thinking? Eric Gordon. Eric Gordon, since his is a role, Steven Stallis has to go in there, talk to him, and say, hey, this is what I want from you this year. This is your role. This is what we expect out of you, and this is what position we're going to put you in. That's something that can be handled with a conversation. And then when it comes to the two stars, if I'm the Houston Rockets, I would take all the management, head coach, and I would sit down with Russell and James. Now, reportedly, when Russell went to when he went to the front office, he pretty much said, I'm out of here. I need to play a certain style of basketball, and this isn't working. So Russell may not be savable at this point. But in terms of James, you have to convince James that if you stay and if you commit to what we're doing, we will put you in championship position. And that's going to be the biggest thing. And here's the thing. With the season starting in about 2 to 3 weeks. Not 2 to 3 weeks, sorry. With the season starting on the 23rd next month. Remember, there's not the offseason where you have 3-4 months to really think on it, ponder, evaluate your options, take more time out. You don't have that type of time. You have about a month and a week to make these decisions. Preferably if you want draft picks, you got to make a decision within the next 5 days. 5-6 days. So if you're Houston, you got to convince James that we can remain competitive. Because if they say, if we trade Russell, what are we getting in return? How are we being better? That's the biggest thing you're going to have to tell Russell. Is that, okay, we'll move you, but we got to make sure we can get enough back if we're going to move you. And then James, we are committed to making a championship team here, and we want you to stay in Houston. But like I said, that inevitability might come where they may sit here and say, we may have to change James Harden too and really restart this thing. And then in a period of about a month and a week, you could see a completely new Houston Rockets team. Because remember, you've heard reports that James Harden in the 76ers, there's interest from Daryl Morey to bring him to Philadelphia. Kendrick Perkins said on First Take that he's heard that the Brooklyn Nets might want to acquire for James Harden. Could you imagine a James Harden, Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant lineup? Now, we don't know how it will work on a playing field because all of them need the ball. But you would think if you have those three players on one team, they'd be the best team in the entire Eastern Conference. So, to me, that's going to be where the questions lie. Because there are teams who are like, hey, we want James. There has been interest expressed. But we don't know what Houston is going to do. And Russell, to me, in this situation is at the worst part because he probably will not be able to go to a team where he can compete to win. He'll probably go to a team where he'll just be on a bad team. Maybe he can make them more relevant, give them a few more wins. Maybe, the Knicks are technically a more promising situation because they have a lot of cap room. If they brought Russell in with his big contract, they could still get another max guy. Again, we don't know if Russell's going to make a player want to go play there. You've heard so much about a lot of players don't want to play with Russell because of the way he plays. Like, they love him as a teammate, but if you're trying to win championships, he's not really the player you want to go and try to play with intentionally. And so maybe, the Knicks could form a better team with that being known and said. But at the same time, we don't know if that's the case. I mean, the Knicks have a lot of young players. Would bringing in Russell Westbrook affect those young players? Would he affect the growth of an R.J. Barrett, of a Mitchell Robinson? Would he affect that? Those are questions you have to ask. Charlotte. It's interesting to me that Charlotte is willing to bring him in, but I feel like it's kind of for the same reason the Knicks are. Michael Jordan has not had a great player outside of Kemba Walker, but not even just a great player, just a player with the type of name value who could sell tickets like Russell Westbrook. And so I think that may be the reason why Charlotte may be interested, because they feel like we bring Russell in, we got us a new point. He can make some things happen. Fans are going to want to come to the games. We're going to become a more exciting team. Potentially, you never know, with the Eastern Conference, if they win some games, they don't even have to be 500. They maybe make the playoffs. And so that move might be beneficial for Charlotte to make. More than likely, if Russell gets moved, it will be to a bad team or a team that's not relevant, because it's unlikely at this point that a championship contender is willing to take on a Russell Westbrook. I don't see Dallas going after him. I don't see the Lakers. I don't see the Clippers. I don't see Boston. I don't see Brooklyn. I don't see any of these teams. I don't see Milwaukee. Milwaukee needs a point guard, but they're not looking at Russ. And so you can tell and you can see the market for Russ is going to be harder, but James is going to be the big cog here. What the decision is that Houston decides to do with James Harden will be a key decision towards this NBA offseason, and it'll be very interesting to see what actually ends up happening, because we're going to have to see if they trade Russell and they don't get a lot back and they get rid of other players, will James feel like, you know what, I might need to push my way out of Houston as well. I love the city of Houston, but this just isn't the place for me to win a championship, and I need to put myself in a better position to win a championship somewhere else. So we're going to have to see what happens in Houston, because a lot of stuff's happening. A big breakup could come, and it's going to shock the NBA world when that day comes if they do actually end up trading James Harden. But that's all the time we have here for this segment. Coming up next, we got more NBA trade rumors. We got Laker rumors. We got CP3 rumors. All that here and more on the GSMC Basketball Podcast.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we discussed the Houston Rockets situation, with them potentially having to blow the whole thing up, with Russell Westbrook wanting out, according to The Athletic, and people saying that James Harden is very concerned about the team's future and may eventually, into the offseason, may want out himself, depending on moves Houston makes. Plus, Austin Rivers, PJ Tucker, and Eric Gordon also unhappy with their roles as well. And Houston might be a team that's doing a lot of selling this offseason instead of buying. And they may have to restart this entire thing. They weren't coming into this maybe thinking this was going to be a rebuild outside of a new GM and new head coach, but it might be a total rebuild. In about a month and a week, we may see a completely new Houston Rockets team out there on the court. But before we continue on to more trade rumors, I just want to remind you guys, don't forget to follow us at GSMC_basketball. Follow us there. We can talk about all things basketball, college, or professional. And we'd love to hear from you guys and support us. If you want to support GSMC, support us on there, GSMC_basketball. So we're going to get into some rumors. So the Lakers apparently have added another name to the list of people they could go after this offseason. Apparently there is some interest in a deal between them and the San Antonio Spurs, where the Lakers would give up Danny Green and Kyle Kuzma, two names we hear very often in the trading block for the Lakers, for guard DeMar DeRozan. That would be an interesting move if the Lakers go there, because DeMar DeRozan is one of those guards who can't really shoot. You would think you're giving up two guys who could shoot for a guy who can't shoot. That's what you'd be doing if you brought in DeMar DeRozan. So it would be interesting for them to take that approach. I feel like if I was the Lakers, I wouldn't make this trade, because I think, the Lakers weren't a great shooting team last year. And to think that you would trade your two best shooters and then say, we're going to bring in a non-shooter, which DeMar DeRozan can help him in the mid-range, get into the paint. He's a good defender. But it's kind of that thing where LeBron is better when he has the floor spread. And DeMar DeRozan isn't a guy to take threes and spread the floor. So the fit to me is questionable with them being interested. We've heard other names like Bradley Beal, but we have heard also that Bradley Beal wants to stay in Washington to try to see and give it another go with John Wall. We've heard about Derrick Rose potentially this offseason, maybe a guy. There were even rumors about Chris Paul, but apparently today Stephen A. Smith shot that down and said that he does not want to go to the Lakers, CP3. So, and I'll get more into Chris Paul in a minute. But so it'll be interesting to see who they actually maybe go and get. Would they potentially put themselves in the Oladipo sweepstakes? We reported earlier this year that they really weren't interested in that. They felt like that Oladipo wouldn't be a high-end enough third star for them. So, we know DeMar DeRozan probably wants out of San Antonio. So it's interesting to me, if I'm the Lakers, if you make that trade. I don't know if a lot of Laker fans would be particularly happy about that type of trade being made, because you just, like I said, the fit just seems a little weird. Especially with them having a lot of guys on one-year deals. Are the Lakers willing to maybe reconstruct their entire roster again? And maybe the Lakers, maybe we don't know. Maybe they know with Danny Green and Kyle Kuzma, this might be the best they can get for those two guys. So we don't know what their eternal thinking is. We don't even know if DeMar DeRozan is a first option. Sometimes you hear these trade rumors and that's just a player they would be interested in trading for, but not necessarily the first option in terms of player they want to trade for. It's almost like, okay, if we go through the offseason and we've tried for other players, then we know we're interested in him, and we know probably we could get him if we needed to. Because maybe that could be what this is with DeMar DeRozan. Maybe it's not an instant, yeah, he's going to be the guy, but potentially he could be there and like, okay, maybe we should make this move and go in a different direction. So it'll be interesting if the Lakers actually did end up making a move like that. And then going to Chris Paul. So we reported a week ago that Chris Paul has interest in going to New York or LA. So a lot of people made that connection to the Lakers, right? Like Lakers. Well, apparently I just told you that Stephen A said that Chris Paul doesn't want to go to the Lakers. So all that leaves is the other LA team. And it's been reported that Chris Paul is open to a reunion with the Clippers. He is open to going back and playing with the Clippers. And now, and it's also been reported that Kawhi Leonard is interested in bringing Chris Paul to the Clippers and has actually made contact with Chris Paul as well. So now there's a recruiting pitch going on now for Chris Paul. And we know the Clippers are in the market for a point guard. So if I was the Clippers, you would think, okay, what would the Clippers give up? You would probably think of Patrick Beverley. You would probably think they'd have to give up Patrick Beverley in this trade for Chris Paul. Because they do need a scoring guard. They do need a guy who can play make. See, Patrick Beverley is more of a 3-and-D point guard. There's not a lot of starting 3-and-D point guards. You have mainly facilitators like a Ricky Rubio, and then you have maybe a scoring point guard like a Kyrie Irving, or you have sometimes your all-arounds like a Chris Paul. But Patrick Beverley is one of the few players who's like, he hits the three, plays defense, but he's not really a scorer, and he's not really a facilitator and a playmaker. And so they've been in the market for a point guard. You've heard about them potentially trying to get Rajon Rondo. And so that would be interesting if they were able to pull off this trade, because you would then think, okay, the Rondo would go back to the Lakers, and now you're having to contend with Chris Paul on the Clippers. So that, to me, would be very interesting to see what would happen there. And I just think that's interesting that Chris is willing to make that reunion happen again. Go back to LA. Maybe he feels like, you know what? I never disliked the team in the first place. You know, different things have changed. Ty Lue is head coach. Maybe he has respect for Ty Lue. And maybe he feels like that's the best decision for him to make at this point in his career. Because, you know, Chris Paul's still trying to get a championship too. And you saw last year, he still has something in the tank. So if that Chris Paul comes to the Clippers, you thought they were favorites last year. They're definitely going to be favorites this year, especially if they end up keeping Paul George. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Chris Paul and where he ends up this offseason. Then you have Serge Ibaka. Serge Ibaka is going to be a free agent this offseason from the Toronto Raptors. And there's been reports that the Nets and the Lakers are his top suitors. The Lakers only can offer him a mid-level exception, so Ibaka would have to be willing to come there for less money. Because now the question with Ibaka that some people wonder is, okay, so at this point in his career, what does he want? Does he want championships or does he want money? He won a championship in Toronto, so do some people think, oh, he already has a championship, he cares more about money? Or does he still want a championship? So the Lakers are interested in bringing him in. I think that front court with Ibaka and Davis would be deadly. And we forget, Ibaka can shoot the three. I believe he had a career high for three at 38-39% this past year. So he would definitely, I think, really help the Lakers out if they were able to get him in. But also Brooklyn. Brooklyn is interested. They said Kevin Durant has actually even started recruiting Serge Ibaka to come to the Brooklyn Nets. And so that's, you know, Ibaka and Kevin Durant have history from his OKC days. And so if he came to Brooklyn, you know, Brooklyn now, you know, you already got DeAndre Jordan and Jared Allen, two defensive big men in the top, not really known for the scoring. Now you're bringing Ibaka, who can also play defense, but also can give you a bit from the front end. Because you know KD's trying to get the team ready to go into the season and be the favorites in the East and try to win a championship. So it's definitely a lot of stuff going on. And, I mean, we know Toronto would like Serge Ibaka back, but we know, like, you know, that tax in Canada is a lot. So, you know, we don't know if it's all going to actually work out at the end of the day. But So, Ibaka is going to have a good number of suitors as well. And so we're going to have to see what all ends up happening when it gets to that point. Because you know that Serge is probably going to look over his options. And he's going to really sit here and say, okay, where do I need to go? Where do I want to go? And who's going to be best for me to put me in the best position to win? And then we're going to switch over to some Milwaukee news. So the Milwaukee Bucks clearly have moves they want to make. So we're going to talk about what they're trying to sell before we get into what they're trying to get. So apparently, reportedly, according to Kevin O'Connor of The Ringer, the Bucks have offered point guard Eric Bledsoe to multiple teams before the draft. They have said, "What would you give us for Bledsoe?" They are saying, "Hey, we want to give him up. Do you have interest? What are you willing to give us?" And because the Bucks are trying to move off Eric Bledsoe, they're trying to upgrade that position, and because Eric Bledsoe has not played bad, but he has not played up to the level that they need from that position for them to be more of a championship contender, while also trying to show Giannis we are committed to winning and we are committed to upgrading. And so that is going to be a big move. If they do move off of Eric Bledsoe, it'll be interesting to see which team is willing to take Eric Bledsoe. Remember, Bledsoe is owed $35 million over the next 2 seasons. So it's a lot of money to bring him in. His performance hasn't lived up to his contract, but Eric Bledsoe can still be a solid player in this league, a solid piece to the puzzle, and a guy who you could bring in for depth. But it's just like, are you really willing to pay maybe someone $35 million to just be a role player? That's going to be the big thing with Eric Bledsoe, is somebody willing to potentially take that money and pay that money out that Eric Bledsoe is owed on his contract. That's going to be the question. And, we don't know who might be willing to. You've heard the Knicks are willing to maybe take some bad contracts. If they whiffed on a Russell Westbrook, would they go for an Eric Bledsoe next? That's something we'll have to see. Bledsoe only has 2 years left in his deals, with a third year potentially guaranteed. So we're going to have to see, the whole process if the Bucks are able to move him before the draft, because they're probably trying to get a pick in return for this year's draft if they're going to move Eric Bledsoe. And then they're trying to acquire some players. Now, we know Houston might have a whole-scale change to their system and their roster, right? So now they're saying that the Bucks have interest in P.J. Tucker and Robert Covington. That's also what Kevin O'Connor of The Ringer has said, that they're in pursuit of Robert Covington and P.J. Tucker. And so this goes back to my Houston point. If they moved off of Robert Covington and P.J. Tucker, what message are you sending to James Harden? What message are you sending if then you move Russell Westbrook? And if they're not getting quality in return, you're going to kind of sit there and think to yourself, if you're James, we're not competing for a championship, and I don't know if I want to do that. And Milwaukee, on the end, if they were able to acquire PJ and Robert Covington, get them shooters. PJ Tucker's a guy who can defend, shoot the three. Covington's probably 2 of the best 3D guys in the NBA. And Milwaukee would have instantly upgraded their roster. Maybe potentially that's a move they make. Maybe there's a 3-team deal potentially. You take Russell, maybe move him to the Knicks. You move PJ and Covington to the Bucks. Then the Rockets maybe get a pick back. Maybe Eric Bledsoe back. You never know. Maybe Eric Bledsoe could be involved. Maybe that's a potential deal that could be talked about and discussed. But it's clear that Bucks are actively trying to improve, and they're trying to do what they got to do to make it happen. So we're going to have to see how it all turns out as the Bucks are actively looking at players, trying to make moves. And like I said, Houston might make a move, would beat them, maybe become a three-team trade. And we'll have to see what all compensation is given out from that situation. But that's all the time we have here for this segment. Coming up next, we're going to continue with more trade rumors as we have a bunch more to get to. We got to get into some Pacers news, potentially Miles Turner on the move. Also, the Magic and the Mavs. We got to get into all that right here on the podcast. Stay tuned.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we discussed multiple trade rumors. Last segment, we talked about CP3 having interest in not going to the Lakers, but going to the Clippers. Gave my thoughts on that. We also talked about Serge Ibaka getting interest from both the Nets and also the Lakers, as Kevin Durant is actively recruiting him over there. We have also talked about the Brooklyn Nets. Actually, not the Brooklyn Nets. We actually talked about the Milwaukee Bucks and their interest in Robert Covington and PJ Tucker, as they're looking to potentially make a move there. We also discussed Eric Bledsoe being basically offered, basically them saying, hey, do you want him? And so we talked about that as well. So there's a lot of moves right now that could be potentially being made in the NBA very, very soon. And we still got more to discuss potentially in the rumor mill. So we're going to first talk about a trade that hasn't really gotten, or not a trade rumor and interest that has not given a lot of attention for obvious reasons. And that's Miles Turner. Miles Turner right now, young guy, can shoot three, can rim protect, and he's probably, a lot of people consider a great contract right now. And currently, there are two teams that have shown interest in him. The Boston Celtics and the Charlotte Hornets. Now, if he stays in Indiana, we know Indiana has switched head coaches. They're looking to run more of an up-tempo offense, which might be better for Turner because he can kind of play a little bit in the offense with his ability to stretch the floor. But there has also been, like I said, I always harp back to this when the Pacers were eliminated. I saw multiple Pacer outlets in terms of fan rumor pages and stuff like that, that a lot of people were saying, we got to upgrade this team and Miles Turner might be the player we need to move. And so it's not crazy to hear his name coming up in trade talks, because we know, as Indiana probably should know, he's not a player that you deem untouchable. So if you are interested, you'll definitely listen to an offer, but it just depends on what is willing to be given up for Miles Turner to leave, because he is a solid starting center in this league, I believe. And when you look at the two teams, we know Boston clearly would be in the sweepstakes because we know their biggest weakness is the front court. They don't have a guy like a Miles Turner who can now shoot it, block shots, and he doesn't cost a lot. And it'll work with the players they have. Maybe that's, like I said, maybe that's a potential deal where if you wanted to swap Gordon Hayward for a Miles Turner, would give Pacers a lot of forwards. But maybe that's a move you make potentially. You would obviously be taking more money in if you're the Pacers. But you may feel like, hey, we have Sabonis, we got Warren, we have, Brogdon, especially if they do move off of Victor Oladipo, which looks like will happen at some point this offseason. You still got a guy who can come in and score, and so it's not like you lost everything. You didn't lose two key guys. You got a guy back who can play well, and then you go with what you have, and then you see what this new head coach and everybody can do, and we'll see what the Indiana Pacers look like. And then on the Hornets side of things, they're trying to get better. They're trying to be more competitive. If they were able to maybe pull off a trade for a Russell Westbrook and then maybe get a Miles Turner, could they become a little bit more interesting of a team? They have two guys that they've added that are good quality players. Maybe that makes Charlotte a more interesting team to watch this season. So that's a potential move to look out for. I would not be shocked if a move happens to either one of those teams, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's even more teams that get into the sweepstakes for Miles Turner that we just haven't heard about yet. So that's something to keep a lookout on, because Miles Turner could be a very underrated name that moves this offseason that a lot of people don't talk about. but he's a very valuable player. He brings a lot to the table, and he can help any team be more better. Championship or rebuilding team, he can help them instantly. And then we have rumors. The Magic are willing to trade Aaron Gordon in the 15th overall draft pick. They're looking to package both of those things and move to get a potential good player or to move up in the draft. The plan is to move up into the lottery, but you never know if a player might come up. So, Gordon currently signed through the 2020-2022 season, is set to make about $34.5 million over the next 2 years. He's ranked 4th on the team with 14.4 points a game, 7 rebounds, and almost 4 assists. He was hurt this playoffs, which is why he didn't play. He's a guy who very athletic, as we know, one of the best dunkers in the league, has extended his range. He can shoot the 3 ball. Not the greatest defender, but decent. And so the Magic are trying to get up. Now, how high, we'll have to see. They have the 15th pick. Because when you hear a lot of these lottery rumors, you always hear the top 3 players in the top 3. So are they trying to move up for a top 3 player? Or maybe is there a guy at 4, 5, and 6 they feel like we have a good chance to get that we really love and we're willing to trade up and get him? That's interesting to see if somebody's willing to take that. You know, we've heard about the Hawks, potentially moving their pick, which I'll get more into later. They've been potentially trying to move their pick. Is that a spot where they give up Aaron Gordon? I don't really see the fit with Aaron Gordon on the Hawks. Would that, what I'm saying, because with John Collins and Clint Capella, but you never know, potentially. Maybe Golden State might be willing to do a move like that. Maybe Golden State's willing to take 15 and Aaron Gordon off the books, But, I think the Warriors want to hang on to that pick as long as they can until the draft passes by, because they want to make sure that they have a chance just in case to maybe get a star player with that second pick. Maybe you never know. Maybe Minnesota could be in that conversation. Maybe not. I mean, it's just one of those things where you're hearing a lot of news. A lot of teams are trying to trade up into the lottery. And so you're trying to see a lot of teams are trying to trade down on the lottery. So we're sure that those teams are probably in discussion with each other, trying to figure out what's the best move to make for both of them. I think the Magic are in that point of their roster and where they are as an organization, where they're pretty much barely borderline playoff team, and then when they get to the playoffs, can't really compete. And so I'm sure they're looking to maybe get a younger player to help upgrade the team. Aaron Gordon has been there for a minute. He hasn't really reached maybe the expectations of his draft pick status, but a guy who can really help a team at anywhere he goes. And I think it'll be interesting to see if they're able to get a deal done, because that's a pretty decent deal if you're able to get a player who could probably start for you or come off the bench and give you production. And then, listen, you're getting the 15th pick, which in this draft is probably valued as much as a second rounder, but at least maybe you can get a guy around that range that you might, still like and still, get a guy that you think you can work with going into the future. So we're going to have to see how that goes. And then we have the Mavs. The Mavs are eyeing a third star right now. They're trying to bring a third star in, and 3 players on their list: Zach LaVine, Victor Oladipo, and Spencer Dinwiddie. As you can tell, what all of them have in common, another guard. So they're looking to add someone next to Luka Doncic in the backcourt to help solidify their backcourt. If I go through each player individually, I think Zach LaVine is the one guy to me that I think would make a lot of sense here. Zach LaVine is not that great of a shooter, but can shoot, and I think it would kind of work a little bit. Luka Doncic is a great three-point shooter either, but will take a lot of threes, and I think they can work off each other's game. Luka's more of a very fundamental offensive player, but a great offensive player, and then Zach LaVine's more of the splash, more of the dunk, more of the athleticism. Maybe that can really help peel off of each other, because now, you got a guy who, if you got Luka out here trying to do you up, but also knowing, hey, Zach can go up for alley hoops, Zach can make big plays, and Luka can take advantage of that. And then you can't really come down on Zach LaVine cutting to the basket, because if KP, Kristaps Porzingis, is in the corner, you got to defend him. So that, to me, would be a very interesting move on Dallas's part. I think it would be a really good move on Dallas's part. Then if you go over to Victor Oladipo, he's been mentioned in a lot of teams. To me, I don't feel like he would be the best out of the 3 of them in this role. I think that he'll help the team, but I just don't think the type of impact that Victor Oladipo would have he could make on a team like this, to me. he can play well, and all of this really hinges on what Victor Oladipo is when he comes back fully healthy from the injuries that he's had the last couple of years. But I just feel like his impact on this Dallas team, knowing the way they play, playing that up and down style, which he can play, I just don't know if Victor Oladipo would be the best move right here. But at the same time, I do feel like he is a good third option. So if they did make the move, I don't look at this as this, they're not going to be good. I just don't think he'll give them as much push towards a championship run as maybe they want to pursue. And then you got Spencer Dinwiddie. Spencer Dinwiddie, a name that we hear a lot of. We've heard about the Nets potentially having to move one of Chris LeVert or Spencer Dinwiddie. Spencer Dinwiddie is a guy who you've seen in multiple games. He can score. He is a scoring guard. He's more of a point guard, though. That's the one thing out of all three of them that Spencer Dinwiddie is more of a point guard, even though he can score. So it'll be interesting. But he can also handle the ball if needed. I think him and, Luka Doncic would also be a good combination. I think Dallas looks and says, it's unlikely we're going to get a high-end star or Kristaps Porzingis would then become the third option. But we can still get a very good a very good third option because I think also one thing they're looking at is with Kristaps Porzingis having injury issues sometimes. You got to look at, okay, out of those three players, which player can get you the bucket the fastest? Which player can get you a bucket the soonest? You would maybe look towards potentially, I don't know, Spencer Dinwiddie or Zach LaVine. So, I'm thinking you need a guy who can get you buckets. Dinwiddie, out of all three of them, is the best all-around scorer, in my opinion. He has more ways to score with a good mid-range, good three, can get to the rim. And so that would be a move that I think this is probably the guy out of all three that I would prefer to put into that situation and have try to win. So, to me, I think that is a move that you have to look out for. And I think it will be interesting to see if they actually were able to make a move for Spencer Dinwiddie and get Spencer Dinwiddie as well. But at the end of the day, if we're looking at who is most likely to be moved, probably Victor Oladipo out of the three. I think the Bulls are probably not going to move off Zach LaVine. The Nets might, but they're going to definitely know other teams might be interested, so they would have to see what's getting given up. I think Victor Oladipo is more of he's going to leave no matter what, and the Pacers probably want to move him. And when you have a mutual want from both player and team to leave, that will probably lead to a more likely chance of him being gone from the team. And then we're going to get into this last one before we get out of this segment. The Boston Celtics are now in the Jrue Holiday sweepstakes, as he is another team has said they want Jrue Holiday. Also, the Hawks have also got their name into the Jrue Holiday hat as well. So a lot of teams right now definitely see the value in Jrue Holiday. The Pelicans have a lot of suitors. David Griffin is a guy who trusts in a situation like this, and I think he looks at the situation and knows, oh man, we have a lot of guys and a lot of teams that want him. So he can really sit here. He's like, okay, give me your best offer, give me your best offer, give me your best offer, and really sit there and say, okay, who gives us the best chance to win instantly with whatever package is being offered to us for said player? Because Jrue Holiday has a lot of suitors, and this is David Griffin's chance, really, to help the Pelicans as a team overall, as they're a team that may be looking to make playoffs this year, as they should, with Zion and Ingram. And maybe, with Jrue Holiday being on the move, they can maybe get some pieces that they need. Depends on which team is offering the pieces they need, and then they make a good move there. But, the Celtics, if he was added, it would be interesting. I feel like if you're the Celtics, if you don't really need Jrue Holiday unless you're moving Gordon Hayward, in my opinion. If you don't move Gordon, it wouldn't make sense to bring in Jrue. Because you got so many guards, but you still don't have this position that has been the biggest issue for you this past year answered. And so I don't think maybe that would be a move I would make on Boston. The Hawks, I could see that move being made. I think that would be a good move to help out with Trae Young. And that would be a pretty dynamic backcourt with Jrue Holiday and Trae Young. And it would make the Eastern Conference a little bit more interesting if the Hawks become a legitimate playoff contender, just getting to the playoffs this year. But that's all the time we have here for the segment. Coming up next, we're going to get into some more news and rumors. Like I said, all episode long, baby. News and rumors. Stay tuned.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we got into much more trade rumors in the NBA. I mean, there's a lot that we've gotten into today. When it came to trade rumors, a lot of stuff's happening right now when it comes to, trades. We talked about Miles Turner potentially going to the Celtics or the Hornets. We've talked about also the Magic. We've talked about the Mavs potentially eyeing a third spar. Spencer Dinwiddie, Zach LaVine, Victor Oladipo. Mavs wouldn't trade 15 and Aaron Gordon. Celtics looking at Drew Holiday. Hawks looking at Drew Holiday, which I'll go into more detail in this segment. And so a lot of stuff is happening right now. But we're going to get into two things here we're going to get into three stories before the end of this segment. The first one, we're going to go back to Houston. Now, Houston is obviously interested in bigs. They know that they need big men. They are aware of that. They know that it's needed because they know, listen, you traded all your big men away, which was basically Clint Capella and everybody else. You have a lot of forwards on your roster. You can't win like that because you're not doing small ball. So there's a couple of big guys they're looking at. They're looking at Serge Ibaka, so you can add Houston into the race for Serge Ibaka. Serge Ibaka's getting a lot of love. And then you also can add Nerlens Noel. A lot of people haven't talked about Nerlens Noel. Shot blocking rim pretender. Alley-oop guy. Kind of more similar to what Clint Capella is, where Ibaka gives you more of a more developed offensive game. But either way, they need big men. And so those are the two guys they're looking at. The two guys that they think could potentially help their team. And it'll be interesting to see if they're going to be able to make a move. Because they need a quality big. But the thing about it is the typical situation. Noel is probably going to be the cheaper option, where Ibaka will be the more expensive option. So maybe if he goes to Houston, he's like, hey, yeah, I have some history with James. Yeah, all that. But I may not be willing to take a pay cut to play with them. And so that's something that Houston has to look at and realize and say, okay, well, are we willing to pay him? So that's just something to keep an eye out on and see if maybe the Rockets can pick one of those two up. I feel like they will probably get one. Ibaka has more suitors. I'm sure we're going to start hearing more suitors for Noel when that time comes around. We just got to wait and see. And so now we have some more news on Chris Paul and the potential trade to the Knicks. So there are some people within New York, some execs within Madison Square Garden, within the Knicks organization, that are wary and feeling a little unsure about giving up a lot of assets for Chris Paul because of the fact that New York is maybe potentially looking to make two big trades if they did bring in Chris Paul. And they don't want to give up all their assets for Chris and then have nothing else for anybody else. So I think that is, this is something that organizations have to weigh when you make these trades. Are we really okay with giving up as much as we might have to give up? And do we have any other moves that we may potentially want to make that could be affected if we made a trade like this? So I completely understand the Knicks being hesitant to maybe pull off that trade because they know, hey, you don't only just want Chris Paul. If you want to get another big player, you might have to do another trade. So you don't want to give anything you could give to other teams for Chris Paul, and then you have nothing back. Because more than likely, if you make that play for Chris Paul, you're not getting another. You might get a lower end of the bench player for Chris Paul with him, but you won't get another quality player most of the time unless you're giving up or getting a third team involved. So, to me, I feel like the Knicks are actually being smart here. They're looking at, do we really want to do this for Chris? Unless we are sure we can get the deal that gives us the best chance to still get another guy if we still made this deal. We've already talked about Chris Paul coming to the Knicks, potentially Carmelo coming to the Knicks as well, joining in. We've discussed that before. And my thoughts, because Carmelo could go in free agency and then, Chris Paul through trade. What if the Knicks look at that and say, if we don't have to give up too much for Chris Paul, maybe we can make even another deal on top of that. Another deal where now we got Carmelo, Chris Paul, another star, and now maybe the Knicks feel like they're now much more in position to win now franchise than they were previously. Remember, free agency starts in a week. So a lot of these decisions are coming fast. Draft is coming up really soon. These decisions are going to be hitting fast. Remember, free agency is on the 20th, so a lot of stuff's going to be happening, which is why there is so much of an influx of rumors and news coming in, and the Knicks are going to be at the forefront of that. So we'll have to see if Chris Paul gets moved to the Knicks, what the Knicks give up. But the Knicks have multiple options at point. As we've said before, they are interested in Russell Westbrook as well. So maybe they may even have the same concerns there, even though they may sit here and say, well, we may not want to give up as much for Russell Westbrook as we do for Chris Paul, because that's something that could very much be the case. And then in other news, I discussed last segment that the Hawks have interest in bringing in Jrue Holiday. Now, going deeper into that trade deal and going deeper into that discussion, now they're trying to package the 6th pick, probably a player or two. And I don't think it'll be anybody major like John Collins or anything of that, and try to offer that to New Orleans. Now, New Orleans getting the 6th pick, that might not be bad. They may say, okay, we get 2 top lottery picks. Maybe Pelicans could use that for their own advantage. Maybe they could sit here and say, hey, maybe we could try to trade for somebody now that we have 2 lottery picks. Like I said, I think Jrue Holiday on the Hawks would be a really good fit. I think him and Trae Young would be a really good fit. I think you get that veteran player who also can take over games also. Because that's one thing also about the Hawks. Outside of Trae Young, you don't really have anybody who can take over games. Jrue Holiday has takeover game potential. He's not going to do it like 20 times. But, if Trae struggles, Jrue can carry the offense a little bit. You still got John to give you 20 and 10. Kevin Huerter, DeAndre Hunter. Cam Reddish continues their development. The Hawks with that lineup looks pretty good. You got Clint Capella. The Hawks look like a very exciting team. We didn't even see Clint Capella play this last year after the trade because he was injured, then COVID. So now you got Clint you're going to see. You got Jrue Holiday. You added 2 guys, 2 quality pieces. Then you got Trae, John, Huerter, Reddish. The Hawks are going to look like a very interesting team on paper this year if they were able to make this deal. And that might be the most favorable deal right now for the Pelicans as well, in terms of if they wanted to move up in the draft. Well, the 6th pick might be one of the highest pick they can get, and maybe that might be the difference between them going ahead and going with him and going ahead and not going with him. So we're going to have to see how that all turns out and if they actually do end up making that move at the end of the day. And then Fred VanVleet, my God, Fred, Mr. Fleet. He said in an interview that he is looking to get paid this offseason. So he has made it clear his biggest thing this offseason is he's trying to get paid his money. He's trying to get paid, what he feels like he deserves. He says, of course, winning's important, but I have a championship. I need to cash out. And this is something that you always wonder about players when they come into free agency. Depending on where they are in their career, depending on what's happened in their career so far, are you more interested in the business of winning and taking less money or cashing out and maybe potentially going to a situation that isn't as great at that moment in terms of championship aspirations. And Fred VanVleet says, listen, I haven't had that big deal. I'm looking to get my big deal this offseason. Every player wants that big contract. And so this is Fred VanVleet's chance to get his big contract, and I don't blame him. He needs to go out there. He needs to do his thing. People, I think, sometimes don't remember and think, without Fred VanVleet, the Raptors may not have a championship. He made huge shots in that finals against the Warriors to win the game. He has been one of their best offensive players and one of the best clutch players in the NBA that nobody talks about. Fred VanVleet can bring a lot to a team. He's gritty. He's tough. He's not the biggest guy. He can shoot. Fred VanVleet is a guy who can definitely contribute to your basketball team instantly and be a big part. And more than likely, wherever he goes, he'll probably get paid big money to be a starting guard. Remember, he's been backing up Kyle Lowry. So he might have a team where it's like, okay, you're in the lineup. This is partially your team as well. And I think all of that is something that he's looking at, and he's saying, you know, I would be a fool not to try to achieve that because, listen, I've won a championship. So it's not like I need a championship to validate anything. At this rate, you know, of course, I would love to add more hardware. What player would not want to add more hardware? But I also don't feel like, oh, let me not cash out because I'm trying to win. Because then if that's the case, he'll never get paid. And so he's going to try to get his money as he should. And then some final news before we get out of here. The Thunder have a new head coach. I do not know how to say his last name, but his name is Mark. I'm going to say Daganov. I'm going to say that. I don't know if I'm saying it right. I'm saying Daganov. He has been promoted from within the organization to be the new Thunder head coach. He's 35, very young. He's been the head coach of the G League's Oklahoma City Blue, leading him to the full playoffs 4 times, having an overall record of 143-107. A really young guy, goes with the young movement they're doing. And so we'll have to see what he does. You know, getting promoted from the G League now up to being the head coach of an NBA team. You know, you look at the situation, probably won't be winning right away, but he has some young talent like Sages Alexander. We all know he's probably that one big star out of the young guys they have that they're going to be looking at and saying, okay. And then he has to be in charge of development, improving the team, helping the team get better, all of that. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. It's going to be interesting to see how everything works out, and I think it's going to be very exciting to see how everything works out with him in Oklahoma City. Like I said, full youth movement, full rebuilding movement. Remember, last year was supposed to be a rebuilding year for them. They happened to end up winning, but at the same time, Sam Presti was like, well, this isn't necessarily good for us either because we're not going to win a championship with this team, and we're not trying to stay in this, try to win now mode. Let's restart fully. Let's really get rid of some guys, bring in a lot of assets, build the team up, and win that way. Because when you build it up that way, you don't know what the ceiling is till the players develop. Where if you have Chris Paul and you're always going to keep winning, you're like, well, this is our max, and we don't want to be at this level anymore. But that's all the time we have here on the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for letting me be part of your game once again. Don't forget to follow us on social media, especially Twitter, at GSMC_basketball. Also, don't forget to listen to our other amazing podcasts here at the GSMC Podcast Network. And then don't forget to subscribe or leave a review on any platform that you're listening to us to. We definitely appreciate it. We definitely would love to hear from you guys. This is your host, Brice, signing out, saying have a good day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.